Hello, this is Dr. Whitney, also known as Dr. Mom ND, joining you for another Wellness Wednesday. And I'm sorry I'm a little bit late today because once again, there is so much information to get through. I ended up having to table one of the topics I wanted to cover today for next week, as well as it took me a little bit more time to even get the information I all wanted down for today. So we're going to try to cover a few things. I tried to type it all out, so I've got a very concise and organized presentation for you to cover all the topics that I wanted to get through, and also to try to keep this shorter than last week because I know last week got really, really long. So I am experimenting with a ring light. As you can see, it is reflecting a little bit in my glasses, so I'm trying to find the right spot to sit so it doesn't do that. But if I find it too distracting, I'll just take my glasses off. But I really like wearing them. They're blue light blocking glasses. I think they really help. Okay, so this is week 3 of this ongoing topic of viral illness, specifically getting targeted down to coronavirus, because there is so much misinformation out there, and just in general trying to bring some clear and transparent education and direction to help people calmly but yet respectfully, and I mean that in the sense of taking it seriously, deal with this impending illness. So one thing that I have wanted to talk about the last couple weeks but forgot both times, as I have talked about things you can do in the home, is I wanted to share on the video, because I think I only did it in a comment in the first week, was the air purifier that I use in my home. So last year, my husband had some kind of respiratory illness that just hung around and hung around and hung around. He had a really bad sore throat. I was convinced he had scarlet fever because after the sore throat, he had a systemic rash. He went to the doctor. They refused to culture his throat even after the rapid strep test was negative, and instead did a chest x-ray and told him that it looked like he had pneumonia. Gave him antibiotics, he took those, and he still didn't get better, and he was still sick for 2 more weeks. So I decided it was just time to pull the trigger on an air purifier for our home, and I had been following this company called Molecule for several months, maybe almost a year. So anytime companies make these grand claims, I'm always a little leery, right? But they offer a 60-day free in-home trial, so I thought, what the heck? They have what is called a PICO technology, and I'm going to read it right from their website. Developed over 2 decades by research scientists, PICO is an innovative technology that uses free radicals, the same radicals used to destroy cancer cells, to break down pollutants at a molecular level, including VOCs, which are the chemicals like in paint and stuff, bacteria, mold, viruses, and allergens. By using nanotechnology, PICO, or photoelectric, oh no, I didn't write it all in. It's photoelectric something, is able to destroy pollutants 1,000 times smaller than what traditional HEPA technology was designed to trap. So we've been using that in our house now for over a year, and I swear it is making a huge difference. So again, we're talking about respiratory illnesses here, respiratory viral illnesses, things that are airborne, that are being transferred when people come in close contact with other people, which is why the social distancing is becoming one of the bigger recommendations for people to follow now. So if you are looking for something, I'm sure there are probably maybe other products out there, but this one I feel like has made a really big difference in my house. So if you're looking for something like that to add to your sort of protective arsenal, that might be something to consider. That, as well as there are arguments about I shouldn't say arguments, but people talk about diffusing essential oils, and something like tea tree oil has been shown to have antiviral properties. So, I'm sure there's other oils again out there that you could do. I don't know which ones off the top of my head are going to be maybe specific to coronavirus, because some viruses have specific botanicals that are going to be more effective because they are either preventing them from binding the way they want to in our body, or they're essentially kind of starving them. So that's something that I'm probably going to end up getting into next week when we talk about the cytokine storm, because I'm just anticipating trying to keep this under 20-25 minutes today. I'm not going to have time to get into that, and I feel like it's a really, really important topic that deserves its own whole talk because the cytokine storm is essentially what lends itself to the high mortality and morbidity rates of these viruses. So that was the first thing, air purifying, ways to get viruses out of the air in your home. Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is the increases in cases that we're seeing. Okay. Just to keep this all in perspective again, and this isn't to belittle this, maybe belittle is not the right word. It's not to make light of it. It doesn't need to be scary, but it should be taken seriously, okay? But still understanding things in perspective, okay? So there is going to be an increase in cases exponentially that you're going to see reported in the news over the next couple days and next couple weeks, all right? There are several reasons for this. One, we simply weren't testing for it before, okay? So you can't have a confirmed case if you've not tested for it. And or the test kits simply weren't available, okay? Now that there's more testing going on, there's more confirmed cases, which this is a good thing, okay? Because the more confirmed cases there are that people recover from, it will outweigh the mortality rate, okay? So right now we're hovering around a 3% mortality rate because they're taking the number of confirmed cases and a percentage of those are dying, okay? So the more that are confirmed and recover, it helps lower this scary statistic that people are worried about, okay? And again, in comparison to other historical viral pandemics, this mortality percentage is still significantly lower than other really, really horrible historical pandemics, like the H5N1 has a mortality rate of 60%. The H1N1 1918 Spanish flu pandemic had a much lower mortality rate. I believe it was around, I don't have that chart right in front of me. I think it was around, oh, here, I have it right here. It was around, what's not even on here, 1918. I just read it though in the viral history book. I believe it was, the fact was the mortality rate was around 20%, but it was more infective. It infected a lot more people. So those are things to consider, the infection rate versus the actual mortality rate. So it can be infective and you catch it and you recover, which a lot of people seem to be doing, or there can be several reasons. You're older, you have an autoimmune condition, your immune system's compromised, you have an underlying health condition somewhat related to your respiratory system, because again, these are viral illnesses. You are a smoker or you are obese, which we know is just a comorbidity of so many illnesses. So those are reasons why you're going to see these numbers jump, okay? So I'll get to more of that in a second. Now, the guidelines have also changed in warranting who gets to get tested, okay? Right now, you can't waltz into the doctor's office and say, I have the symptoms, I want to get tested. Or at least you couldn't do that before, okay? So it's just the way medicine works. There has to be certain guidelines that are met to warrant certain labs, certain treatments to ultimately confer a certain diagnosis. So the guidelines used to be that in order to warrant a test for coronavirus, you had to have traveled to China or been exposed to someone who has traveled to China in the last several weeks. That is now changed to, if you present at your doctor's office with symptoms and your doctor warrants that you should be tested, he can order a test. Now, again, that's if he has a test available. I have heard locally that people have been going into clinics and hospitals and asking to be tested, and even though the doctor wants to, they don't have test kits available and they're being turned away with no other advice given. So more tests are coming, more confirmed cases will be coming. Don't panic. We know that this is going to happen because when you test more people, ultimately more cases will be confirmed. In fact, what did I see the other day? In Korea, they were testing 10,000 people a day. Up until this last week, we were only testing 5,000 people a week. So these huge numbers, again, that you're seeing in other countries, it's because when you test everyone, the whole population, you're going to get a lot more confirmed cases. Combine this with the fact that you can be contagious for several days before spreading the infection, before you show several days, you can be contagious for several days and spreading the infection before you even show any signs. And further, that for the most part, kids either A, aren't getting infected or are and don't show signs, okay? And that's not uncommon. There are other viruses like Hep A that also do this in kids. The kids are like the carriers, the daycare providers and parents all get sick, and then they go back and test the kids and the kids all test positive, but they didn't show any signs of the illness. So again, don't freak out. There are probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of cases currently out there right now that have been out there for a couple weeks that haven't been tested or confirmed. So as they get around to testing more, you're going to see more numbers. But remember, this doesn't necessarily mean it's getting worse. It's just that we're identifying the cases. We're confirming that, which is a good thing because it'll help us keep track of the true mortality rate, okay? So it decreases your chances if there are confirmed cases of people recovering versus confirmed cases of people dying, okay? So stay calm, do all the right things, distance yourself most of all, which is the new recommendation. It was hand washing a week ago, coughing into your arm, some immune support. Now we're talking about social distancing, which is historically what has been done to curb many of these types of outbreaks or pandemics, which just means the illness has spread across the globe. So the Surgeon General recently said people should know that this is likely going to get worse before it gets better. Americans should absolutely be prepared, but that doesn't mean that they should be afraid. Okay, and that's exactly what we just said. For now, we know, right now, we know the virus is not mutated. It's not attacking healthy people. So this could go away like SARS did, or it may become an annual thing like the flu. We don't know yet. We don't know how it's going to play out, but that's what the virologists and all the scientists, that's their job, to keep an eye on it, keep tracking it, keep testing it, and watching it. So the Surgeon General was also quoted as saying, "What I want Americans to know is that when we look back at past infectious disease outbreaks like this, they weren't ended with therapeutics or vaccines. They were ended with the basic public health and hygiene measures that keep us safe from the flu and the everyday cold, and will also keep us safe from coronavirus." That was on March 4th. So that was, a week ago? Exactly. So that's the first part, just wanting to address some of that, okay? Furthermore, I think there's good news. What I have heard on the news lately is that I believe in China, they're now on the downswing. They hit the peak and now it looks like things are looking up for them. I believe it was said there was either no new deaths or no new cases going on 3 days now. So that's good. That's good news. Now we just keep our fingers crossed that the virus doesn't mutate and have a second wave. It's so much better. It's so much so better that why they reported that, what I heard was that there was some president or prime minister or somebody in China that was actually even going to go to Wuhan to visit. So if there are elected officials in government going back to ground zero to kind of check out things, it obviously is a sign that things are going in the right direction there. So another thing is that I'm seeing still a lot in the news is about the vaccine, and a lot of professional people, whether they're scientists, researchers, whatever, they, to their credit, they are saying the right things, but we're still seeing a lot of stuff from certain individuals, I'm not going to name names, in social media where people are, it seems like, not wanting to take all of the kind of personal precautions, and just saying that, well, they'll develop a cure or they'll develop a vaccine. And the reality is this, okay, and this is not an anti-vaccine rant. This is simply understanding the timeline. And this is what I heard from a gentleman who's a researcher involved in the development. It was on NPR yesterday morning, so I'm sure you can look the story up. But the timeline to get a vaccine is not going to happen during this pandemic, okay? Despite the news that there is a first clinical trial, this was out of the Seattle News, March 4th again. The first clinical trials for a coronavirus vaccine will take place in Seattle. They're looking for 45 healthy adults to begin the trial. Lead researcher Dr. Lisa Jackson has said that this virus may become a seasonal problem like influenza, or again, it may disappear like SARS did years ago. We just don't know. So they're exploring treatments. What this means, though, in terms of the timeline is that It's going to take 4 to 5 weeks to get the trial underway. It's going to take 3 to 4 months of the trial, of having the trial, and then they can begin phase 2, which is another 6 to 9 months to actually prove that it works, and then they can go into production and distribution, which would take roughly another couple months. So realistically, there is no way possible that this vaccine will even be available, if at all, for well over a year. Okay, so again, don't rely on this, I'm not going to say snake oil, but this magical solution that's supposed to just going to present itself. Okay, the reality is, again, this is an RNA-based virus, which means and it's one of the largest RNA-based viruses, meaning it has lots of pieces and that it can and will mutate just like the flu. So that is really the difference between being able to have a stable vaccination to prevent and keep at bay some kind of infectious disease like this versus something like the flu, where we know the effective rate of the flu vaccine is what, somewhere around 40% a year to year. So that all depends on how the virus mutates, which is why this is so much so uncharted territory right now in trying to understand how to keep this, contained and at bay. So on that note, on the topic of vaccines, I saw yesterday 2 articles that I want to share. And again, this is not about being anti-vaccine. This is about presenting pieces of the puzzle that may give us clarity on several things. A, who is being affected and the most severely and sometimes leading to death. And what's the other thing I was going to say? And having a piece of the puzzle for prevention was the other thing. So if this is something you haven't already done, you may want to consider leaving it that way. Okay. So 2 articles from PubMed. One is from 2000. Was a study done from 2017 to 2018, but recently published in 2020. And the other one, I thought I printed 2 of them out here. Oh, it's because there's 2. Okay, it doesn't look the same. The other one, I'm not sure on the date, but I believe it was, 2011, actually. Okay, so surprisingly, I've seen this shared on different platforms, but this is the study. So this is on PubMed. Okay, this is our most considered fair, honest, legitimate scientific stuff out there, published in different journals. This was published in the journal Vaccine 2020. Influenza vaccination and respiratory virus interference among Department of Defense personnel during the 17-18 influenza season. So the reason they did this study was they wanted to see if receiving the flu vaccine increased the risk of being infected by other respiratory viruses, a phenomenon known as virus interference. Okay, so they did this study, and to be fair, the people they looked at in their department, it said, the report of influenza vaccine was not associated with virus interference among their population. However, examining virus interference by specific respiratory viruses showed mixed results. Okay, so what this means is the vaccine-derived virus interference was significantly associated with coronavirus and human metapneumovirus. So what that means is that getting the flu shot actually interfered with your immune system to the extent that it made you more susceptible to coronavirus and metapneumovirus. Now, again, I am not, what am I going to say here? I wrote this out so I could make sure I'm covering all the points here. I think this is something logical to think about, okay? Because I have heard, not seen any articles, but I'm not sure where, that one of the things that make coronavirus so deadly or infective in China was that the government started to impose the flu vaccine or mandate the flu vaccine on everyone just in case. So that would make sense, along with the fact that why is it so deadly to the elderly right now? We keep talking about, oh, it's only killing the elderly, infecting the elderly and the immune compromised, those with underlying conditions for now. But maybe that's only because they're more susceptible, because that's also the populations that we push the flu vaccine on the most. So to be fair, yes, for those populations, the flu vaccine does have benefits, right? let's see here. What did I say? This is, yep. So the other part of this, to be fair, to prove that I'm being objective here, the same study did say, however, significant protection with vaccination was associated not only with most influenza viruses, but also with parainfluenza, RSV, and non-influenza virus co-infections. So what the study is saying is that if you got the flu vaccine, it made you more susceptible to being infected with coronavirus or metapneumonia virus. However, it did seem to confer other protection to parainfluenza, which is CRU, RSV, and non-influenza virus co-infection. So that was one study. The other study, and you can Google this, you can Google PubMed coronavirus flu shot, and like a dozen different articles come up. And then they even get into SARS and MERS, which are all coronavirus family viruses. This other article was increased risk of non-influenza respiratory virus infections are associated with receipt of an inactivated influenza vaccine. So this was another one where they did a study to try to see if people who got the shot were any more susceptible to other infections. And where is the discussion? So again, to be fair, they said the increased risk of non-influenza respiratory, which means other respiratory viruses other than influenza, okay? The increased risk of non-influenza respiratory virus infections among this test population could be an artifactual finding. For example, measurement bias could have been resulted if patients didn't report their stuff in the right time or didn't report subsequent episodes, et cetera, et cetera. However, they also say alternatively, our results, the increased risk could also indicate a real effect. So receipt of the flu shot could increase influenza immunity at the expense of reduced immunity to non-influenza respiratory viruses by some unknown biological mechanism. Alternatively, our results could be explained by the temporary, non-specific immunity after influenza virus infection through the cell-mediated response, or more likely the innate immune response to infection. So it has to do with different parts of your immune system because vaccines stimulate part of your immune system. That is the part where when you're exposed to something, your body makes a memory to it, and then you're supposed to be sort of immune to it going forward. Kind of like chickenpox, right? So you get the chickenpox, you get it, your body learns how to be protected against it, and you never get it again. That is the idea or the goal of a vaccine. But then there's another part of your immune system that just goes from infection to infection and says, oh, hey, there's something here, I need to respond to it. There's no programmed memory, it just does the best it can. So these are two studies that are saying, for whatever reason, the flu shot might be part of the problem making people more susceptible. So again, when you see these increases in numbers of confirmed cases and the spread of the infection, keep these things in mind. They're all pieces of the puzzle. Why are certain people more susceptible? Why are people having worse symptoms? It really comes down to, again, doing natural things to keep your immune system strong and protected. So enough about vaccines. I am a naturopathic doctor, so I'm still going to point out that as a naturopathic doctor, there are also studies that have been shown that vitamin D is as effective, if not more, than the flu vaccine. And again, here, the logical correlation, which we have talked about many times, is that it's no coincidence that the flu season happens in the winter, the time when we get the least amount of sunlight, okay? Nor the fact that pretty much every natural practitioner, blogger, or otherwise out there right now is still recommending vitamin D proactively, as well as high dose vitamin C at the first sign of this infection. So again, natural things seem to stimulate the right parts of the immune system to prevent this specific virus from replicating and or attaching to where it wants to in the body. So in terms of the media, I do not want to get into, this is not a political battle, this is not me crying fake news, but simply pointing out that there are logical and transparent ways to educate people, okay? The media, that's their job, to sensationalize things, right? Like, oh my God, Meghan and Harry are quitting the royal family. Oh my God. It's literally in my newsfeed every single day. I don't care. It has zero effect on my life, but it gets media attention, so that's what people talk about. I posted yesterday on Facebook a post that someone else had created about the thousands of other viral illnesses that are out there that can kill you if you have an underlying condition or are elderly or otherwise, compromised in your health, that we don't have vaccines for. And we're not running around freaking out about leprosy, even though there's 200 cases of that a year, right? And oh, by the way, what happened to measles? Where's all the outrage about the measles outbreaks last year, which didn't kill anyone either. So I just want to explain a little bit of that too, right? So the reason the media is getting the bad rap is it has to do with how the stories are presented, right? So it's just like when you learn about statistics and interpreting statistics and understanding that things can be presented in a lot of different ways, okay? So the first story that I heard about, the first deaths in the US for coronavirus, I saw that the article, it was from CNN, the headline read, Washington State reports 6 deaths in the last 2 days, first deaths in the US. Oh my God, freak out, 6 people died, holy crap. Wait, what? So after reading the story, you actually learn the details and that 5 of the 6 people were all elderly and they were all in the same elderly care facility. Okay, so it's the details that are important. But the headline, 6 deaths in Washington in 2 days, the first deaths in the US, that gets a lot more attention than 5 old people got a respiratory viral illness in a nursing home and died. They're not telling you, they're leaving out things that sensationalize the headline, that get more attention. Okay, so it's similar to when the measles outbreaks were all happening. One of the largest, quote, outbreaks was in Portland. I believe it was Portland, and where the cases quickly climbed into the double digits. Except nobody was talking about the fact that it was one population. I believe it was an immigrant population from Russia who over there, I guess, they didn't choose to get vaccinated against the measles. They came over here, they were all in the same small community, the same neighborhood, and they were all attending the same church. So it stayed confined to that community and that population. But it was reported as this massive outbreak of like 57 cases. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't anything to be sensationalized. But again, no one died, and now we don't hear about it anymore, right? Now we hear about coronavirus. And yes, coronavirus is serious. We do need to take precautions. It's not something to just poo-poo. You do have to, take it seriously. And it's just, again, to be clear, concise, clear education and preparation steps, all right? So a lot of this today came from my brother. I have to say thank you to him because once again, he presented me with information that this needs to be taken seriously. So I am referring back to a interview of an infectious disease virologist guy that I know it was on Joe Rogan's podcast. So if you want to listen to him, that's great. But he's basically reiterating the same things in that, you have to keep it all in perspective. He's been studying these things for 15, 30 years, not 1 or 2 years since these outbreaks have become popular. And they're doing their best educational, I want to say guesses, but this is what you do in science. You have to figure out what the possible outcomes could be and how you would handle those. And what we want to know is this new strain going to evolve? The Spanish flu of 1918 was so deadly because of not just the factors we mentioned, it provided the perfect breeding ground in the war conditions, these close, cramped conditions, which is subnote, by the way. If you look historically, why all these crazy new viral illnesses come out of China or areas where they have super dense populations. SARS, avian flu, they all came from there. But the Spanish flu lasted for 2 years. Okay, so this isn't like 2 weeks and it's over. It's gonna keep happening for several months until we see how the virus plays out. Just like SARS kind of went away, the flu kind of hangs around and mutates and sees if it can come back every year in a different form. So the Spanish flu is so deadly because initially the virus only went after the elderly, those underlying conditions, and then it mutated. And it came back for a second wave. And then it started knocking out healthy people. And that's what made that strain in particular so deadly. So that's really what we're keeping sort of on the back burner, okay? And again, doing the right things to prepare for the potential of healthy people being infected by coronavirus. That is what a lot of this natural remedy stuff is about. So again, washing your hands, keeping your distance, staying home if you don't need to, taking your shoes off, maybe outside before you get into the house, coughing in your arm. There's some basic hygiene, just like the Surgeon General said. And then if we know it could take this serious turn and we know that a vaccine is not going to happen fast enough to be an option, or that the virus might mutate and the vaccine we get won't even be effective, what are our options? There are still other references in natural medicine to viral herbal stuff. But what I've seen lately, and I'm going to leave it for next week because we're at 30 minutes and I don't want to go beyond that today, really is its cytokine storms. So here's your intro for next week. I also wanted to include this, but it is such a large topic in and of itself that I'm going to wait so that I have more time to present a lot better information next week. But I've been seeing on social media several things where people are now talking about cytokine storms. A lot of it coming from just flu, people who are getting this nasty flu bug and it's hanging around and then it's getting worse, even though they're doing the right things. So again, like this was an article that somebody tagged about maybe you should not be taking elderberry syrup when your flu takes that nasty turn towards pneumonia. And this is why. So this is an article. That other gal that I shared last week, the pediatrician, she touches on it in her article as well, sepsis and cytokine storms. So the reason that these infections can become so deadly is because of cytokine storms. And we know, based on even a lot of this book, again, that there are specific herbs that have specific actions to mitigate the cytokine storm, as well as reduce or prevent these harmful inflammatory levels from happening, which is what causes all of these horrible things. So here's a little taste. So cytokine storms, this is right out of the book. The more serious pandemic viruses, like the 1918 flu, the 2009 H1N1, and the 2004 H5N1, cause severe pulmonary injury and inflammation. In these cases, the cytokine cascades become storms and the death rate correspondingly climbs. H5N1, for example, has around a 60% death rate in those who are affected, usually from acute respiratory distress and organ failure. The 1918 rate had a much lower mortality rate, about 20%. Oh, see, this is where I read it. I was right. But the strain was much more infective, reaching about 1/3 of the total global population. While there is usually not a corresponding increase in viral replication during a viral storm, the cytokine increases, which are your own little inflammatory guys in your body. So they can be good or bad. Some are good, some are bad, some can go both ways. The cytokine increases in severe pandemic influenzas or other viral illnesses are significant, and this is where the mortal damage comes from. So interferon gamma production is usually increased, as is the expression of tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 1 beta, chemokine 10, a couple of other ones. I'm not going to get into interleukin 6. But mainly the interferon gamma levels and the virus synergistically interact to significantly increase chemokines in the airway epithelial cells. So what this means is that essentially certain little messengers in your immune system are upregulating inflammation, which is good when you cut yourself, right? That's the little guys that jump to the scene, redness, they're, killing any bacteria that's there, they're dealing with things. So acute inflammation is always good. The chronic stuff, that's what causes this long-term damage. And if it gets upregulated too far, the cells actually burst. And that's what causes a lot of this really bad respiratory stuff where people are like, pneumonia, fluid in the lungs, all that kind of stuff. But the point is that as you go through this chapter, he talks about the specific cytokines, the specific ways that they message and bind, and that there are specific antiviral herbals that you can use to downregulate some of that stuff. So one of the questions why the elderberry came up is because elderberry tends to be one that upregulates. So yes, at the sign of initial illness, you would want to take some, but if the illness really sets in and you get worse, then you want to stop. You don't want to take things that cause more inflammation, that cause more cytokines, that cause more damage. So there's ones that upregulate, there's ones that downregulate. So again, you don't just want to go out and willy-nilly take anything. You want to have a doctor's advice or a reference, a resource, something like this that points you in the right direction of when and how to take certain things at the certain stage that you're in an illness. That said, I'm going to go into much more detail on that next week. That's also going to lead me into the fact that my other book, this one that I've shared before, had an antiviral and immune support tincture as well as a flu formula, and I have most of those botanicals on hand. So I'm also going to go through this book again and get some of the ones for specific to coronavirus and this upregulating, downregulating of the cytokine storm, and custom blend some tinctures to have on hand for myself, my family, my patients. But if anybody out there is interested in something like that, let me know. Maybe before next week if you can, or even after. Maybe I'll wait till after I talk next week too. It will be completely based on the cost of the supplies, but I'm guessing it would be around $40 to $50 a bottle and shipping. So since I already have more of them on hand, I think it's just time to make something like that. And if that gives anybody else peace of mind, that's great. So I will talk more about the cytokine storm and specifically what receptors and things are being upregulated and downregulated, or when they should be upregulated or downregulated, and what botanicals have those effects at the right time next week. So tune in then, and I will have much more information for you about that. And I think I covered everything. So let me see. We talked about the diagnosis, the guidelines, how there'll be increases, putting things in perspective again, the flu shot stuff, the vaccine timeline, the Surgeon General, the tinctures, and the cytokine stories. Yep, we will talk about that next week. So that was everything for today. Thank you for joining me. Please comment if you have questions or there's something you feel like you'd like me to address next week. Otherwise, we'll plan on just talking about cytokine storms and treatment next week and see if that is maybe finally the end. It's a 4-part series on illness, viral illnesses, and coronavirus, or if we're still in the heat of it and I still feel like there's things that I want to address for people to provide clarity and not comfort. What's the word I'm looking for? That to keep you calm, like just to reassure you that yes, it is serious, but we are well prepared, I think, naturally to deal with it. So we'll keep our eye on things and I'll keep you posted. So this is Dr. Whitney with another Wellness Wednesday, our part 3 in our viral illness series, specifically focusing on coronavirus updates. And I will see you all next week. Thank you and have a great afternoon.